It's a real pleasure to be with you all today. Good morning, Your Grace. Today I'm going to be looking into something that brings me a lot of joy and something that I enjoy immensely, and that is porn. Actually, now I probably should phrase that a little bit better. Good morning, everyone. What I want to do is actually take a slightly offbeat take and a diagnosis of what has now become effectively a product of pop culture. And that product of pop culture is pornography. In particular, what I'm going to do is to look at some of the common misconceptions about pornography that people in general and Christians in particular hold. So I'm going to organize this presentation around 3 misconceptions, 3 claims, and 3 keywords that will encapsulate the reality of pornography that I wish to explore. So the first conception is that porn is about sex. The second misconception is that porn is erotic. And the third misconception is that porn is about the body. So my 3 claims are that first, porn is not about sex. And to that, the key word I want you to keep at the back of your mind is the word possibility. Secondly, my second claim is that porn is not erotic. And the key word I want you to be aware of here is the word salvation. The third claim is that porn is not about the body. And the key word there is the word hyperreal or hyperreality. And what I hope to show is that responses to pornography should involve our becoming not less erotic, but more properly erotic. And before finishing up, we will have a brief look into what reclaiming the erotic, reclaiming Eros would look like. All right, let's look at the first theme, and that is that porn is not about sex. Now, when you first come across a claim like this, the first thing that one might think is how ridiculous that claim sounds. I mean, just look at the porn going on the screen. Now, just a quick side note. When someone tells you, look at the porn going onto the screen, don't look at the porn going onto the screen. Just because the presenter has a PhD does not make it right. Anyway, let's look at the porn on the screen. If there is anything that the porn industry markets itself as, it is that pornography brings sexual acts into the full view of the user. In the face of that, we may be forgiven for asking, so how can porn not be about sex? Now, before answering, I probably should bring a disclaimer. Although I am here talking to you about porn, what I am actually doing is talking about philosophy. I mean, I am an academic dean after all, so I just can't help myself. So let's humor the nerd. Why is porn a philosophical problem? It is a philosophical problem because before pornography engages us at the level of our sexuality, it is actually engaging us at the level of metaphysics. Now, what is metaphysics? Metaphysics is a subdiscipline of philosophy that discusses where we find reality, where we locate reality. Okay, things will get a bit technical here, but I'll try and keep it as simple as possible. When we talk about reality, right, and when we talk about metaphysics, there are actually 2 aspects of reality that we need to consider. The first is what we call the actual. The second is what we call the possible. So just as an image, think about seeds. Seeds are actual seeds, but we know that seeds will grow into plants, vegetables, and trees. So even though there is an actual seed, a seed is also a possible vegetable or tree. Now, Thomas Aquinas calls these 2 aspects of reality, actuality and possibility, act and potency. You may have come across these terms before, right? Now, when Thomas talks about where reality lies, he says that true reality is to be found in actuality. Medieval philosophers call this the priority of act over potency as the ground for all reality. Does it make sense to everyone? Right? So it's a metaphysical way of saying that one must have both feet planted on the ground and focus on what is actually right in front of him or her. Now, as I say this, it may seem so blatantly obvious. So why is this important to know? It's important to know because we are now living in an age where that priority is now reversed. Instead of actuality being the grounds of reality, we are living in an age that prioritizes potency, possibility over the actual. We live in an age where we are enchanted by the possible and very often so enchanted at the expense of what is actually right in front of us. And this way of thinking is entrenched in many subtle ways. Some of the more recognizable versions of this include the emphasis on catchphrases like one's full potential, being the best version of myself. I hate that phrase. Being the best version of myself. Or the iPhone 14, which although is not out yet, we know is going to be so much better than the 3-month-old iPhone 13. Right? We are drenched in possibility in the culture that we live in. And in this culture of possibility, what may be, right? What may happen in the distant future is more important than what is actually right in front of us. Okay, so now we ask the question, why are we bothering with these technicalities? These technicalities are important because the possibilities that we find so attractive, so alluring, precisely because they are not actualities, these possibilities are actually simulations of reality. The word simulation is an important word here. Right? So when we live in a culture, right, that prioritizes possibility, we are encouraged to live in a simulated reality. We are encouraged to live in a virtual reality. Okay? Where the possibilities are endless. And because the possibilities are endless, our happiness has to lie in these endless possibilities rather than the actuality in front of us. Okay, as a concrete example of this kind of metaphysics, think of advertisements. All right? Now, does an advertisement work? Here's a thought experiment. Does an advertisement work by saying, what you have is enough? Be content with the thing that is actually in front of you. Life is good. You are sufficient. Does advertising work like that? No, right? Advertisements work by playing on the possible. Think how much better life can be if only you have X. No, of course you are not sufficient. The only way that you can be sufficient is to wear Y, and so on and so forth. Right? Another example, a concrete example of this kind of metaphysics is our phones, particularly if you have a smartphone. Because phones actually are delivery mechanisms for this kind of metaphysics. Whether it is the social media posts that I scroll through so that I may find the next event, find the next update, or nugget of news to give me that endorphin boost, whether it is the shopping apps that find the next best thing that may look good on me, or the dating apps wherein I might swipe right to the potential relationship that I could enter into. Whether it's any of these things, our phones ensure that possibility is never too far away from us at every waking moment. Now, believe me when I say this is important for porn. I am saying this because in reality, pornography's selling point is actually not the sex being had by those in the video. Rather, pornography's selling point is in the infinite possible forms of sex that may be had by those viewing the video. Do you see the distinction? Right? It's not about the sex being had by those in the video, it's about the sex that may be had by those viewing the video. That's the distinction. One of the distinguishing features of pornography is not that there is so much of it. What is a distinguishing feature of pornography is that there are endless varieties of it that may be catalogued into various niches and combinations based on race, age, scenario, gender, number of parties, species, the list goes on. Now, what does cataloging do? Let's think of catalogs for a moment. Catalogs don't enable us to get the thing. What catalogs do in essence is make their readers imagine what life would be like if they had the thing. Right? Just imagine the possibility if I had this on the catalog on me. So to apply this to pornography then, the cataloging of people having sex in a video turns that sexual activity into possible sexual activity by the time it gets to the viewer, precisely because the sexual activity is so heavily catalogued. It is precisely because of this possible sexual activity that makes the consumption of porn more of a trade in fantasy about sex that might be had rather than the sex itself. All right? Does it make sense to everyone? Okay. Now, let's move to our second misconception, that porn is erotic, that porn's function is to satisfy one's erotic drives. Now, recall what we said earlier, that the consumption of pornography, or rather that in the consumption of pornography, we locate our happiness in the possible rather than the actual. At one level, this happiness can be described as simply fun and enjoyment. But if we interrogate this philosophically, we can find that there is actually much more to happiness than simple fun. Now, a helpful person to think of here is a German philosopher by the name of Walter Benjamin and his book On the Concept of History. Now, in On the Concept of History, Benjamin had this great line. He says, "Our image of happiness is indissolubly bound up with the image of redemption." I'll say this again. Our image of happiness is indissolubly bound up with the image of redemption. So what does this mean? It means that the thing in which we locate our happiness is also the thing by which we seek a moment of redemption. What he calls, and this is an interesting thing for a Marxist philosopher, he calls this the messianic moment. Right? In other words, seeking happiness is fundamentally not about getting our jollies. Seeking happiness is about seeking deliverance, redemption, and even salvation. Right? Now, why is this so important in the use of porn? It is important because a lot of research has shown that people rarely use porn primarily to satisfy sexual urges. In fact, the research suggests that there is usually some underlying or ongoing wound, an ongoing problem, or an ongoing condition that has taken hold of the user, from which the user escapes by using a porn-generated orgasm. In other words, under the guise of the momentary thrill of the orgasm, pornography is actually being used as an anesthetic. Right? Under the guise of having that momentary thrill, there is actually an attempt to distract oneself from the underlying wound or problem. So what this means is that porn is not being used to feel something. Rather, if you dig deep down, primarily porn is being used to not feel something. We can put this in another way that links up with our first section. Now, porn is often used as a form of deliverance, as I said. A deliverance from what is actual, right? The actual wound, the actual circumstance, the weakness, and so on. Right? It is a deliverance from what is right in front of us, which we find constricting, wounding, or suffocating. And it is suffocating because we experience that wound or situation or condition over and over again on an ongoing basis. Suffocation is accompanied by monotony, and monotony is often accompanied by boredom. I bring up boredom and pornography because you and I have gone through this experience of boredom. When we go through this kind of soul-crushing boredom and monotony, we desire something unique, something novel, to break the monotony. This is why we turn to shopping. This is why we turn to social media. And yes, this is why we turn to porn. Porn has now become one of the many forms of deliverance from this monotony. So in a twist of irony, we may be using our desire for an erotic experience as a form of deliverance from experience. Does that make sense? All right. In that case, we'll turn to our third misconception, and that is that porn is about the body. My claim here is that porn is not about bodies. Because again, this may sound counterintuitive, because again, look at the porn on the screen. There will be bodies everywhere, and naked bodies at that. There is nothing but body. So how can I say that porn is not about the body? What I want to look into here is an implicit claim that is made by the porn industry that porn is delivering something that is real and concrete to the user, and that is, of course, a body. However, let's revisit what we said earlier. We said that we are living in a culture that celebrates the possible over the actual. You might also remember that these possibilities are simulations, right? I said that possibility is a simulation of the actual. And if there are simulations of the actual, if they are simulations of reality, then what possibilities are images of reality rather than reality itself. Now, this theme of images is important to know because while we might think that porn's stock and trade are the bodies in the porn film, it is more accurate to say that what pornography trades in are images of bodies. Images of bodies to be consumed by the user. Now, the reason why I'm drawing attention to images is because pornography does not make sense outside of the context of a culture that is built around images. We tend to think of our culture as materialistic. But I think it's more accurate to say that our culture is essentially a never-ending tsunami of images, whether it is through ads, through logos, or, if we are really honest with ourselves, our games, our laptops, and yes, our phones. Just to give a sense of how exposed a person is to images, digital marketing experts say that the average American, so here I'm just using the American example, the average American can be exposed to anything from 4,000 to 10,000 ads alone per day. Right? And that does not include the images you see in emails, YouTube videos, the 2.5 hours of social media the average person sees per day, and the countless more hours of streaming the average person watches. We have become, as a culture, so awash in images that we actually are now starting to organize our lives around them. We plan holidays, hold elections, arrange schedules, and even our wardrobes around particular kinds of images. Images that are Insta-worthy, travel shots, shots of politicians, shots of celebrities, the list goes on. However, there is something about images that I also want to point out. And this is where the word hyperreal or hyperreality starts to become relevant. Now here, I want to bring a French philosopher named Jean Baudrillard. Baudrillard said that once upon a time, we usually thought that an image refers to something anchored in the real world. An image of a cat has a relation to a real-life cat. An image of a building to a real-life building, and so on. How quaint, isn't it? Baudrillard said that when we become so awash with images, however, we start to live in a condition that he calls hyperreality. Now, what is hyperreality? In hyperreality, images do not necessarily have to refer to reality. In hyperreality, images have become a reality unto themselves. In fact, in hyperreality, images have become more real than reality itself. In hyperreality, Baudrillard says, it is not so much that the image is a reflection of reality. Rather, reality is now regarded as the poor cousin to the image. A cat video is probably going to be a little bit boring unless you put a filter on it and then upload it on Instagram. My face on a video can be a little bit boring unless I put in a filter and make it look like a cat and put it up on Instagram, and so on and so forth. In hyperreality, where images become more real than reality itself, images are now not just a reference object to reality. They have become the grounds of reality itself. Instead of images reflecting reality, images now make reality. They can control reality. Reality now is regarded as this inadequate thing. So in order for that inadequate thing to be made adequate, reality must now be changed, modified to conform to the image. Now, if you want a concrete example where reality is made to conform to an image, think of body image, where a person's sense of what their body should be like is determined by images which are usually artificially modified using airbrushing techniques. Not only that, we are also seeing a boom in people making use of plastic surgery to align their own bodies to these airbrush counterparts. And guess what? There is an increasing evidence now to show that pornographic images are now becoming the standard by which a person's body is to be modified. In hyperreality, the body has become not the standard of reality, but it's now become a plaything of reality, a plaything of a reality that is now determined by images. Now, what's interesting here is that it's not just the body that's become a plaything of images. Sex has also become another one of these playthings. The evidence is coming in to show that an attitude is an attitude that says that sexual activity in real life can only be regarded as satisfying if it mimics the images portrayed in a porn video. Now, you guys are all familiar with Melinda Tankard-Rees' collective Shout. And what her work has done is to document a number of many cases. And what a good number of these cases show is that sexual relationships have become ruined because one of the parties, or sometimes both of the parties, are forced to align their sexual activity with pornographic activity. Now, in more extreme scenarios, sexual activity has become abandoned altogether in favor of the digitized simulations that one sees in a porn video. So in some countries like Japan, the consumption of porn has reached a level that younger demographics are actually having less sex with each other, not more. Another anecdotal example was given to me by an American friend where during a porn convention in a particular city, I forget which city, but during this porn convention, the rates of engaging prostitutes in that city fell for the duration of the convention. Right? So people are having less sex in favor of the pornography, not more. Such is the power of images that in hyperreality, actual reality has become either something to be avoided, or, as in the case where we tailor our sexual activity to fit the porn, reality is a means whereby we simulate the simulation. Right? Just think on that for a minute. Sex is now become one of those things where we are simulating a simulation. Okay. Now, if I just stopped here, that would be very depressing, wouldn't it? Okay, so in the time remaining, what I would like to quickly canvass is a response and to look at what a response to pornography might look like. Now, if you had been following me thus far, congratulations on following me thus far, by the way, you may probably guess that the response must be more than simply don't look at porn. Because porn is a tip of a very large cultural iceberg. Porn makes sense only because we live in a culture that has enabled it. And it is a culture that all of us have, in some way, shape, or form, have helped in maintaining. It's not enough to say, well, I do not watch or sell any pornography, so I must be innocent. Right? Because porn is not simply about peddling sexualized images. Remember, porn is working off a very well-entrenched culture that champions chasing what is possible over attention to what is actually right in front of us. Porn usually works off a culture where we desire to feel erotic things as a way not to feel other things. Thirdly, porn works because it is building upon a culture's preference for simulation over reality. So in light of these 3 points, what might a response to porn look like? Now, awareness is half the battle won. So the first step is to develop a habit of becoming aware of the very subtle ways in which we pursue possibility rather than pay attention to what is right in front of us. For instance, am I using social media as a means to be attentive to what is around me? Or do I use social media to distract myself from what is around me? The second step is to develop a counter habit of proper attention to what is right in front of us, whether it is a situation, a person, a task, and so on. In an age where being distracted is the norm, and believe me, being distracted is the norm in our culture, and in an age where being distracted is the norm, attention to the actual is an act of rebellion. Now, what does attention mean? It means a direct involvement, being present, and also learning to be content with the circumstances that make up your life now, rather than drawing your attention to where your life could be. Now, a third step is something that I think you can only do with proper help and support, and that is to become aware not only of the good things that are around you, but also to become aware of the things within you that are wounds, circumstances, etc., that you find yourself avoiding. Since, as I said, pornography has become a way to help you avoid those things. What I also want to do now is outline how an explicit Christian theology can call out the implicit theology of porn. I haven't talked about the idea of porn as an implicit theology, but that is what my claim ultimately is. Now remember my earlier point that pornography is about locating our redemption or messianic moment in what could be. And now I want to draw your attention to the way in which Christianity's messianic moment is different. Why? Because it is found in Jesus Christ. And what is the significance of Jesus Christ? Jesus Christ is significant because the incarnation locates the actual as the site of salvation, not the possible. The word did not potentially become flesh in the Gospel of John. In the Gospel of John, it said the Word became flesh, and it is through that actual flesh of Jesus Christ that our salvation comes about. Actual flesh on a cross to redeem us from sin, actual flesh out of a tomb to mark his victory over sin. And going further, the church fathers saw Jesus Christ as more than just actual flesh. They saw Jesus Christ as the divine word. And this divine word is a powerful concept. Because the church fathers said, within the divine word lies everything that does exist and everything that could exist. You probably may recognize this in the more recognizable form in the passage of the Gospel of John that says, through him all things were made. Right? But in the divine word, everything that does exist and everything that could exist is to be found in the divine word. And what Christ is doing, right, what this divine word does is bring together both actuality and possibility, both act and potency. And Christ does not crush or cancel the desire that we have for deliverance, especially deliverance from the crushing circumstances of our actual reality. But Christ says to us that deliverance is not to be found by detaching yourself from the actual or from attaching yourself to a simulation. Rather, salvation is to be found in the actual, because the actual is where God's presence is to be found. And with God's presence, there lies his power to save. There is a here-ness and now-ness in Christianity's account of salvation. And this is why St. Paul can say in his second letter to the Corinthians, and this is Corinthians 6:2, and I'll end here. Paul says, "In the time of my favor I heard you. In the day of salvation I helped you. And I tell you now is the time of God's favor. Now is the day of salvation." All right, I'll end it here. Thank you very much for your attention.